Hi, I'm Jeff White. I'm an author and investigative journalist, and this is a series of videos about how to write a book, or at least how I go about writing a book anyway. We talked in the last video about research and the wonderful gear that is the research gear, and also the fact that you're going to have to move out of that research gear, which means you need to research quite efficiently. It's quite easy to lose yourself in a maze of research and never get out of that gear, therefore never move to writing, therefore never finish the book, and therefore never have a book. So it's quite important to be quite organised about your research. And for me, a tool that I find really helpful, and I recommended in an earlier video, is called Scrivener. I'm going to put on screen and show you Scrivener and how I use it. It's a computer program. It runs on Windows, it runs on Mac. And the license for it, I think when I paid it was about £40. It wasn't hugely expensive. It's a bit of a sting, but it's not hugely expensive. And for me, worth its absolute weight in gold. And so this is Scrivener. Now there's two main sections, you'll see at the top left. There's draft, which is where you're going to put your eventual manuscript when you write it, and then there's research, which obviously is the part that interests us for the moment. This is where all of your research is going to live. So all of the audio files, videos, texts, Excel spreadsheets, website pages, web pages, it's all going to live in that research folder rather. So what I do is, now that I have my schedule mapped out, I know what chapters are going to be in the book. So immediately in the research folder, I have a folder for each of the chapters of the book. This is my new book, it's rinsed, it's about money laundering, so some of the chapters will make sense, some of them perhaps not. Now, one of the things I have at the top of the research folder is a thing called editorial points, which is a sort of dumping ground for everything that I think of as I'm writing. Inevitably, you will think of stuff as you go along and think, oh, I must mention that, I must put that in, I must talk about that, but it doesn't belong in any one particular chapter, or if it does, you don't have time to work out where it belongs. So editorial points is just a grab bag of everything that I kind of want to address, things, notes to myself that I need to remember. So that's where that goes. Below that is a little folder for marketing information, so I have ideas about marketing. We'll come on to the marketing gear later on, a gnarly fourth gear for us to consider. But then all of these folders below are for each of the chapters in the book. Now with each folder I have particular things, so I will have, for example, bids. Now bids is a file where I put all of the contacts I've got for the chapter. So if I'm trying to interview somebody, if I'm trying to track somebody down, if I'm trying to get hold of their Facebook page or whatever, everything that I'm trying to chase, everybody that I'm trying to chase, I put in all the information there, their phone numbers, email addresses, when I called them or emailed them, what the response was, and so on. Now, I'm aware that for me as an investigative journalist and writing narrative non-fiction books, that's going to be more relevant for that kind of thing. But I think for a lot of books, a lot of sort of things, you're going to be, contacting people or contacting places to go or venues or whatever. So having somewhere where you can store all that logistical, contacty type information is good, I think. Notes is a folder where I just store all of the general notes. Chapter outline, I have one of those in each chapter folder. We'll come on to that later. For the moment, I want to ignore those and I want to talk about this folder down here. This is cuttings. This is where I store all of the cuttings and all of the audio files for the interviews I've done, the transcripts for the interviews. I have emails that people have sent me. I might store photographs in here. This is my sort of Dropbox for everything that I need, all the research material that I need for this particular chapter. And that's how I start researching. I go through basically other things people have written and I download them and I look at them and I read them and I start to make notes on them. And I will be honest, when I start off in the research phase, it is a demoralizing process. I always set out on the research for each chapter thinking, I don't know anything about this. I'm absolutely useless. Everybody's written everything already. There's nothing to add here. And that's usually the first week. After that first week, I start to think, well, yeah, actually nobody's researched over here, and actually nobody's gone down that line, and actually if I could find that, that would be interesting. And I start to the second week is usually when I start to feel a bit more positive about the research process and start to feel that maybe I've got something to add. So I think that's just something maybe you just have to reconcile to yourself about researching. So what I do is I go through and I start downloading into my cuttings file all sorts of information, useful information that I'm finding about the story that I'm researching. And so what I can do is I can actually bring in website pages that have got research information for me. One thing about Scrivener is you can import web pages. What's useful about that is it preserves the web page. For me, obviously, as an investigative journalist, the idea that websites might go under, I can't handle that. I've got to have everything archived just in case a website gets deleted. But also it stores the actual URL to where the website page is. So if we bring up this page, for example, we've got a page from the internet that it's going to bring up. Now that's useful because I've got the actual page here, but more importantly, perhaps equally importantly, I've got the website link down here. So I can immediately go back, check whether the page is still online, check if there's been any updates and so on. If I can't import the web page, sometimes Scrivener struggles with that, I can just do a PDF and import the PDF, and in there it sits. I've also got my audio for interviews that I've done and so on. So everything lives inside Scrivener. It's a really, really useful package to use. And what I'm doing is I'm sticking everything in here. And let's say I have an article that I'm kind of interested in reading and I want to make some notes on. The other great thing with Scrivener is you can split the screen, which I find really useful. You go to View, Editor Layout, and split vertically. And what I can do is I can have my article on one side, and then I can, for example, insert a new note, and I can make notes directly opposite the article. So as I'm reading through the article, I can make my notes and then store those in the relevant section. So I can work solely inside Scrivener. This is what I like about Scrivener. You're working just inside that application, just inside that piece of software. You're not going out onto the internet and getting distracted. And what happens over time is I start to get notes in these documents and I start to put them into the notes folder. This is the chapter on Hydra, one of the dark web websites. And what I'm doing here is I'm pulling in all of the information that I've got from all the different articles that I've read. And what's quite important is that I note where the information came from. So there's a Wired article that I read about Hydra, and I've put from Wired article, and I've put all of my notes from that Wired article here. From the US Department of Justice press release on the Hydra takedown, these are notes from there. And the reason that's important is I'm trying to keep a track in my notes file of where I got the notes from, so that when I go back to do my sourcing or when I go back to write the chapter, I can immediately refer back to where I got those notes from. So the process is create a folder for the chapter, create a folder for the cuttings within each chapter folder where you're going to store all of your web pages and your interviews and so on. And as you're making notes from everything that you find, store them all in that notes file with a record of where you got the notes from. Now what you end up with is of course a giant notes file. In this case it's 2,100 words. Now what I know is that these notes are going to form the basis of the chapter. And what this note process does is it gives me an indication of how long the chapter is going to be. Because when I start to write the chapter, what I'm going to be doing is taking these notes that I've made and turning them into sentences. Now I know that when I do that, it roughly trebles in length. So if I have a notes file that's got about 2,000 words of notes in it, if I then write that into a chapter, that's going to be about a 6,000 word chapter. So as I'm going through my articles, as I'm making notes, as I'm putting those notes into the notes file, I'm starting to get a sense of how the chapter's doing. And once it gets up to about 3,000 words of notes or thereabouts, I know that's going to result in something like a 9,000 word chapter, and that's about right. So the notes file gives me an indication of how I'm doing in my research, how I'm going. At the moment, after the end of this process, I know several things. I know that I've read a whole bunch of information. I know that I've archived that information into Scrivener. I know that I've been through all of those articles and all of that information and made notes. I know that those notes are in my notes file, and I know that I've linked all of those notes to where I got them from. So I now have a notes file that's full of all of the information I'm going to use for the chapter, referenced by where I got it from, and I know that that notes file, if it's about 3,000 words, is going to result in a chapter of about 9,000. But at the moment, nothing's in any order. The notes file is all over the place. It's just in the order that I found things. So the next task is to turn that notes file into something that's going to be usable to turn into a chapter. And that's going to be the subject of the next video. I hope that's been useful. If you've got tips or tricks or experience to share or comments on it, please feel free to stick it in the comments, etc. I frankly don't care if you do or don't, but if somebody finds this helpful, that is fantastic. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.